Two twin girls set out 3 empty plates in a freezing Chicago park, pretending to eat just to silence their hunger. When a billionaire stops, they hand him a folded note with 5 words that shatter his world. She used to clean your hotel. That moment changes everything. The wind off Lake Michigan had teeth that afternoon. Grant Park lay under a low, iron-colored sky, the kind that made the city feel tired before the day was even over. Bare trees rattled softly their branches, scraping against one another like nervous fingers. Holden Ashford stepped out of the Ashford Tower with the echo of applause still ringing in his ears. The board meeting had gone exactly as planned. Profits up, expansion approved. Another quarter of success sealed with handshakes and practiced smiles. At 38, Holden was everything the city admired: billionaire, CEO, polished, untouchable. His name glowed on buildings. His decisions moved markets. And yet, as the glass doors slid shut behind him, something felt wrong. "Take the night off," he told his driver, surprising them both. He turned and walked toward the park. It had been years since Holden last walked anywhere without a destination, without security, without purpose tied to numbers. The city sounded different at street level: footsteps, distant sirens, the low murmur of strangers' lives intersecting for a moment, then drifting apart. He passed joggers with flushed cheeks, a man feeding pigeons, breadcrumbs, a violinist whose music floated thin and lonely in the cold. Then he saw the blanket. Near a stone bench by the fountain, 2 little girls sat perfectly still. They were small, bundled in coats that looked a season too thin. Between them lay a blanket neatly spread on the ground. On it were 3 paper plates. Empty. Holden slowed confusion, knitting his brow. One of the girls lifted a plastic fork, scooped nothing from the plate, and brought it carefully to her mouth. The other mirrored her movement exactly. Holden stopped walking. At first, Holden told himself it was a game. Children played strange games all the time. Tea parties, make-believe dinners. Imaginary worlds only they understood. But the longer he watched, the more wrong it felt. The girls didn't laugh. They didn't speak. They moved slowly, deliberately, like this wasn't play, but practice. The girl on the left paused after each bite, lowering her fork politely, as if savoring a meal that didn't exist. The girl on the right copied her with uncanny precision, their movements perfectly synchronized, twin to twin. Holden's chest tightened. He noticed details he couldn't ignore now. Hollow cheeks, hands red and cracked from the cold. The way both girls kept their eyes lowered as if they'd learned not to draw attention. And then he saw the 3rd plate. Not 2, 3. "Excuse me," Holden said gently, stepping closer. "Is this a picnic?" Both girls looked up at once. They had the same eyes, hazel green, serious beyond their years. "Yes, sir," said the girl on the left. "We're almost done," added the girl on the right. Their voices were soft, careful. Holden crouched down, keeping his distance. "What are your names?" Ivy said, the left twin. Elsie said, the right, clutching the sleeve of her coat. Holden gestured toward the plates. "And what are you eating?" The twins exchanged a glance. Ivy swallowed, though there was nothing in her mouth. "Our mom says pretending helps," she said quietly. "Helps with what Holden asked, though his heart already knew." Elsie answered barely above a whisper. "Helps us forget we're hungry." The words landed heavier than any accusation Holden had ever faced. For a moment, he forgot how to breathe. He looked around instinctively, scanning the park. "Where's your mom?" he asked. "She's looking for work," Ivy replied. "She said she'd come back soon." Elsie nodded. "She always comes back." Holden noticed how sure she sounded, like she needed to believe it. He glanced again at the blanket, the plates, the careful order of everything. This wasn't neglect. This was survival. "Why 3 plates?" he asked softly. Ivy answered without hesitation. "One is for Mom, so she won't feel left out," Elsie added. Something inside Holden cracked. Ivy reached into a small backpack, its zipper broken, and seams frayed, and pulled out a folded scrap of paper. Mom said. She hesitated, then held it out with both hands. If we met someone kind, we could give this to them. Holden took the paper carefully, as if it might tear. The handwriting was uneven, written in faint pencil. Please don't tell anyone. I just want my mom to stop crying. His throat tightened. Then he turned the paper over. 5 smaller words were written on the back. 5 words that erased every boardroom, every applause-filled meeting, every illusion of distance he had built around himself. She used to clean your hotel. Holden looked at the twins again, really looked at them. And for the first time in his life, success felt unbearably heavy. Holden stayed crouched for a second too long, the folded note burning in his hand like a brand. The park didn't change wind-distant traffic, a few joggers cutting through the cold, but something in him had shifted hard enough to make the world feel newly sharp. He forced his voice to remain steady. Are you two safe here? Ivy nodded quickly, like she'd rehearsed the answer. Elsie nodded slower. We sit where people can see us, she said, eyes flicking toward the path. Mom says bright places, public places, safe places. Holden felt his jaw tighten. He tried to smile. That's smart. Ivy straightened as if the compliment mattered. We're good at following rules, she said. Holden looked down at the 3 empty plates again. His chest hurt in a way he didn't have language for. Do you have food at home? He asked gently. The twins exchanged a glance, silent, twin fast. Ivy's chin lifted. We have some, she said. Elsie's fingers twisted her sleeve. Sometimes. That one word, sometimes, was the crack that let everything flood in. Holden stood careful not to tower over them. Don't go anywhere. I'm going to get you something warm. Okay. Their eyes widened, but neither girl reached out. Neither begged. Neither asked for more than he'd offered. That restraint made it worse. Holden turned and walked fast toward a vendor cart across the path. He could feel the note in his pocket like a weight pulling him down. A man in a knit cap stood behind the cart, steam curling from a metal pot. Hot dogs, pretzels. Holden's voice came out rough. Soup, hot chocolate, sandwiches, fruit, whatever you have that's filling. The vendor blinked. How many? Holden glanced back at the blanket. 2 small bodies, 2 careful faces, 3 plates. Enough, Holden said. And make it warm. He paid without looking at the total. The number didn't matter. That was the problem. For years, numbers had been the only thing that mattered. He carried the food back with both hands, full paper bags, cups, with plastic lids, steam rising like a promise. When he reached the blanket, the twins stared as if he'd brought sunlight. He knelt and set the bags down slowly. This is for you, he said, voice gentle. No pretending. Ivy didn't grab. She looked at the food, then up at him. For real, she whispered. For real, Holden said. Elsie's eyes shone, but she blinked hard like she'd learned not to cry. Thank you, Sir, Ivy said, as if manners could keep them safe from hope. Holden opened the bag and handed Ivy a warm soup cup first, then Elsie. Their hands trembled around the heat like they didn't trust warmth to last. Careful, he said softly. It's hot. Ivy nodded and did something that made Holden's throat close. She bowed her head for a brief second, lips moving in a silent whisper. A tiny prayer, or maybe just a habit of gratitude. Elsie copied her perfect mirror, then took the smallest sip. They ate slowly. Not because they weren't hungry. Holden could see the hunger in the way their eyes tracked every bite, but because they were trying to be good. Trying not to look desperate. Trying to act like this was normal. Holden sat on the bench nearby, hands clasped tight, watching the way children could turn survival into politeness. Every few bites, Ivy tore a piece of sandwich and wrapped it neatly in a napkin. Holden noticed. You can eat that, he said, voice careful. Ivy shook her head firm. "This is for Mom." Elsie nodded, adding, "So she won't have to pretend." The words hit Holden like a punch. He stared at the third plate, the one for Mom, and realized it hadn't been imaginary at all. It was a place set for someone they loved so much they were willing to starve politely beside it. Holden cleared his throat. "Your mom, what's her name again? Marisol Quinn?" Elsie answered. Marisol Ivy repeated softly, like saying it steadied her. Holden swallowed. He knew that name, not as a person, as a line item. He asked, forcing the question through the tightness in his chest. "Do you know why she stopped working at the hotel?" Ivy's expression stayed composed. Too composed. "They told her she couldn't come back," she said. Elsie stared into her soup cup. She cried, she murmured. Then she stopped. She said, "Crying doesn't buy dinner." Holden looked away so they wouldn't see what was happening to his face. He'd sat through lawsuits, media attacks, hostile takeovers. None of it had made his vision blur. This did. He tried to keep his voice steady. "When was that?" "Last spring," Ivy answered. She said it was restructuring. Like when you move furniture," Elsie added, innocent and devastating. "But we didn't move furniture. We moved into the van." Holden's breath caught. "The van?" Elsie hesitated, then nodded. "It's our house. But Mom makes it nice." Ivy lifted her chin, protective. "We're just between homes," she said quickly. "Mom says it's temporary." Holden stared at them, and the city around him felt suddenly unbearable, bright, busy, and different. He heard himself promise quietly, it shouldn't have ever gotten this far. Dusk crept in like a slow closing door. The sky dimmed, streetlights blinking awake one by one, their pale glow stretching across the paths like tired hands. Holden checked the time and felt panic flash sharp and unexpected. He'd been sitting with them nearly an hour. "Your mom's going to worry," he said, rising. "Where do you meet her?" Ivy pointed toward the corner near the street, by the lamp, she said. "The one that flickers." Holden gathered the remaining food carefully, letting the twins carry what they could. They moved like a tiny organized team, one holding the hot chocolate, one holding the wrapped sandwiches, both guarding the napkins like they contained gold. They walked together through the park. Holden stayed on the outside edge of the path, instinctively placing himself between them and the street, scanning faces the way he'd once scanned spreadsheets, looking for threats, for patterns, for signs he might be too late. At the corner, a rusted lamppost buzzed faintly, its light stuttering on and off. It made the world look unstable. The twins stopped beneath it as if it was a checkpoint. Ivy looked up at Holden. "Will you tell Mom we did good?" she asked. Her voice was small, but the question carried the weight of a child desperate to be useful. Holden crouched in front of them. "You did better than good," he said, forcing warmth into every syllable. "You were brave. You were smart. And you took care of each other." Elsie clutched her wrapped sandwich tighter. "We always do," she whispered. Holden's chest tightened. "You shouldn't have to," he said, barely audible. The twins didn't respond. They just watched him, two pairs of eyes waiting for the world to prove it wasn't lying. Then Ivy reached into her pocket and pulled out the folded note again. She held it out like a fragile key. "You can keep it," she said softly. It worked. Holden accepted it with shaking fingers. "I'm going to make sure it keeps working," he promised, though he didn't yet know how. A figure appeared from the shadows of the sidewalk, an exhausted woman in a faded coat, hair pulled back, moving fast with fear. She scanned the corner, her gaze snapping onto the twins like she was counting them with her eyes. Mom, Ivy, and Elsie ran to her at the same time. Marisol dropped to her knees, wrapping both girls in her arms, hands searching their faces. Their hair, their sleeves checking for harm, checking for missing pieces of her heart. Then her eyes lifted to Holden. The air went still. Holden stood under the flickering lamp, the note in his pocket, and felt the moment tighten like a wire, because now he wasn't just looking at a problem. He was looking at the person his signature had broken. Holden Ashford didn't go home after leaving the park. He drove aimlessly through the city, the lake a dark, unmoving presence to his right. Traffic lights blurred past like thoughts he couldn't finish. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw 3 paper plates laid out with careful precision. One for Ivy, one for Elsie, one for their mother. Back in his penthouse, the silence felt aggressive. He poured a drink and didn't touch it. He loosened his tie and left it on the counter like a shed skin. The folded note sat on his desk, small and unforgiving. "She used to clean your hotel." He opened his laptop. It had been years since he'd logged into the internal HR archive himself. That was what departments were for. That was what distance was for. The search bar blinked. Marisol Quinn. The file appeared instantly, like it had been waiting. Holden scrolled through years of spotless performance reviews. Reliable, meticulous, trusted with VIP floors. He paused at a scanned thank you card from a guest praising the woman who made our room feel like home. Then he reached the end. Position eliminated, restructuring. No warning, no transition support, no human language. Holden leaned back in his chair, breath shallow. He remembered the meeting, the way the word restructuring had floated around the table like a magic spell that erased consequences. He'd signed the approval without asking for names. Now he had a name, and 2 faces. His phone buzzed an email from an executive celebrating the quarter's success. Holden didn't open it. He stared out at the dark lake, instead feeling something unfamiliar press against his ribs. Guilt was too small a word. Regret was too neat. This was responsibility arriving late and heavy. He folded the note again and slipped it into his pocket, like a promise he didn't yet understand how to keep. "I won't walk away," he said aloud to the empty room. But the room didn't answer. Marisol Quinn sat in the driver's seat of the van, engine off, listening to the wind slide along the metal frame like a warning. The twins were already asleep in the back, curled together under a single blanket. Ivy's hand rested protectively over Elsie's wrist, even in sleep. Between them lay the wrapped sandwiches, untouched like something sacred. Marisol let herself breathe for the first time that night. She brushed a strand of hair from Ivy's forehead, then Elsie's, counting their breaths the way she always did when the world felt too close. Outside, the city hummed and groaned, distant trains, the echo of traffic, but inside the van everything was small and fragile. 6 months. 6 months since the hotel. Since the service elevator doors had closed behind her for the last time. She could still hear the polite voice of HR, still see the man who never looked up from his screen. "We appreciate your service." Appreciation didn't stop eviction notices. It didn't buy groceries. It didn't warm a van at night. At first, she'd believed she'd find work quickly. She ironed her uniform-printed resumes at the library, walked into hotels with her shoulders squared and her smile ready. Doors closed softly, apologetically. Too many applicants. No openings. We'll call. They never did. The savings vanished. Rent fell behind. One afternoon, she came back from an interview to find the apartment door chained shut. Her belongings stacked in the hallway like a quiet judgment. She'd taken what she could carry. The van had been her brother's once. Old, rusted. It became shelter, then home. She never told the girls they were homeless. "We're between homes," she'd said instead. Like travelers. And when food ran thin, when the girls asked why dinner was so small, Marisol learned to smile and say, "Pretending helps." Tonight she unwrapped one sandwich carefully and took the smallest bite. Not because she wasn't hungry, but because she wanted to make it last. She didn't know yet that the man her daughters had met in the park was lying awake under a skyline of glass, replaying every decision that had led them here. The next morning, Holden Ashford stood in his office before the sun was fully up. Chicago stretched beneath his windows, steel and shadow, indifferent to whatever reckoning was taking place 30 floors above it. He hadn't slept. Instead, he'd read Marisol Quinn's file again. And again. He'd looked at dates, performance notes, tiny digital footprints of a woman who'd given nearly a decade of her life to a company that erased her with one line of text. The company had failed her. That truth landed with an uncomfortable finality. Holden closed the file and opened another window. This one not corporate, not sanitized. He searched for community centers, food pantries, churches on the west side. Places people went when they ran out of options. He didn't tell his assistant where he was going. At the first shelter, a volunteer shook her head apologetically. We see a lot of families. Hard to keep track. At the second, someone recognized the name. Marisol with twin girls, sweet kids. The woman pointed down the street. They sometimes pick up food from the pantry on Jackson. Early. To avoid the crowd. Holden thanked her and waited the next morning standing outside in a plain coat, hands deep in his pockets. He told himself he wasn't there to rescue anyone. He wasn't there to make himself feel better. He was there to face the cost of his own signature. When Marisol appeared at the end of the block, holding a canvas bag, the twins walking beside her with a library book between them, Holden's breath caught. They looked smaller in daylight. Real. Ivy spotted him first. Her steps slowed. Elsie followed her gaze. It's him, Ivy whispered. Marisol stiffened, instantly alert, pulling the girls closer. Holden stepped forward carefully, palms open. Miss Quinn, he said. I'm not here to cause trouble. Her eyes searched his face, wary and exhausted. Then why are you here? Holden reached into his pocket and took out the folded note, the one that had started everything. Because your daughters handed me the truth, he said quietly. And because I owe you an apology that's long overdue. The wind shifted, and with it, the future. Marisol did not invite Holden to speak. She stood there on the sidewalk, one hand resting lightly on Ivy's shoulder, the other on Elsie's, her body angled protectively forward. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. You gave my daughters food, she said, calm and controlled. Thank you. But if you're here to make yourself feel better, you should leave. Holden felt the weight of the crowdless morning press in. He shook his head slowly. That's not why I'm here. Then why? Marisol asked. He took a breath. Because I signed the decision that took your job away. The words hung between them, sharp and exposed. Marisol didn't flinch. She didn't gasp. She simply nodded once, like confirmation of something she already knew. Do you know what that decision cost us? She asked. Holden met her eyes. I know it cost more than I understood at the time. That decision cost my daughters their beds, Marisol said evenly. It cost them dinners. It cost them nights pretending hunger was a game. Ivy's fingers tightened in her sleeve. Elsie lowered her head. Holden swallowed hard. I'm not here to defend it. Marisol's eyes narrowed slightly. Then don't. Silence stretched. A bus passed. Somewhere a door slammed. Holden reached into his pocket and pulled out the folded note, holding it out to her. Your daughters gave me this. I've carried it ever since. Marisol looked at the paper but didn't take it. They weren't supposed to do that, she said quietly. They were trying to protect you, Holden replied. They succeeded. That landed harder than any accusation. Marisol exhaled slowly, her shoulders sagging just a fraction. People like you don't usually come looking for consequences, she said. They send apologies. Or checks. I didn't bring either, Holden said. I came to listen. Marisol studied him for a long moment, searching for performance, for pity, for the kind of kindness that disappears when it gets inconvenient. All she saw was a man who looked like he hadn't slept since the truth found him. They met that evening in a small community hall on the west side, neutral ground, fluorescent lights humming softly overhead. Holden arrived alone. No driver, no assistant, no suit. Marisol sat across from him at a folding table. Ivy and Elsie colored quietly beside her, sharing one box of crayons like they shared everything else. "You said you weren't here to apologize," Marisol began. "So talk." Holden nodded. "I'm reopening your case." Marisol didn't react. "Explain. You'll go through the same hiring process as anyone else," he said carefully. "No favors, no shortcuts. If you're qualified, and your record says you are, you'll be rehired." "And if I'm not?" she asked. "Then I failed to fix what was broken," Holden said. "And you can walk away, knowing I didn't try to buy your silence." Marisol studied him. "This sounds like charity dressed up as fairness." Holden shook his head. "Charity ends when guilt runs out. This doesn't." He gestured toward the girls. "They shouldn't have had to pretend to eat. Not because of a word I signed." Ivy looked up briefly, then back to her drawing. Elsie leaned closer to her sister. Marisol's voice softened despite herself. "You think giving me my job back fixes this?" "No," Holden said honestly. "But it gives you a choice. Something I took without realizing it." Marisol leaned back, arms crossed, staring at the table's scratched surface. "People like me don't get choices, Mr. Ashford." "I know," Holden said quietly. "That's why this matters." Silence again. Then Elsie tugged gently at Marisol's sleeve. "Mom," she whispered. He read the note. Marisol closed her eyes for a second. When she opened them, something in her expression had shifted. Not trust, not forgiveness, but a crack where possibility could enter. "We'll talk," she said finally. "But not here." Holden nodded. "Whenever you're ready." That night, Holden stood alone on the balcony of his penthouse, the city glowing beneath him like a living circuit board. He knew what came next. Rehiring Marisol Quinn would not stay quiet. It never did when power was challenged. He could already hear the boardroom voices, liability optics precedent. He closed his eyes and saw Ivy and Elsie instead, lifting empty forks with perfect manners. He'd spent his life believing success meant insulation, distance, control. Now he understood the cost of that belief. The next morning, he walked into the boardroom and said her name out loud. Marisol Quinn. The reaction was immediate. Confusion, discomfort, resistance. "This sets a dangerous precedent," one executive warned. Holden's father, Graham Ashford, watched him from the end of the table, expression tight. "We run hotels, not second chances," he said. Holden didn't raise his voice. "We run a company built on people." Graham scoffed. "Compassion doesn't pay shareholders." Holden met his gaze. "Neither does ignoring the people who clean our rooms." The room went still. "I signed off on a mistake," Holden continued. "And I'm correcting it." "You're risking the brand," Graham snapped. Holden nodded once. "Then the brand deserves the risk." He left the meeting knowing something fundamental had changed. Back at the van that evening, Marisol watched her daughters eat dinner, real dinner, without pretending. She didn't know yet how the fight would end. Only that somewhere in the city, a man with everything had finally chosen to stand where it could all be taken away. The lobby of the Ashford Grand Chicago hadn't changed. The marble floors still shone like glass. The chandeliers still scattered warm light across polished stone. The air still smelled faintly of citrus, cleaner lemon, and something sharper underneath. Marisol noticed it all the moment she stepped inside. She wore a borrowed coat zipped to her chin, her posture straight, her expression unreadable. To anyone watching, she looked calm. Inside, every step felt like walking through a memory that refused to stay quiet. Ivy and Elsie waited outside with a volunteer from the community hall. Noses pressed to the glass doors, eyes wide. Marisol forced herself not to look back. At the front desk, a young manager glanced up, confusion flickering across his face as he read her name on the appointment list. "Miss Quinn," he asked. "You're here for re-evaluation." Yes, Marisol said evenly. The word reevaluation burned. She hadn't failed an exam. She'd been erased. She followed him past elevators she used to clean, past corridors where she'd once pushed carts quietly at dawn. Faces turned. Some recognized her. Others pretended not to. Whispers traveled faster than footsteps. That's her. Isn't she CEO's idea? Marisol kept walking. In a small conference room, she sat across from two managers and an HR representative. No Holden, no spectacle, just procedure. They asked about her work history. She answered calmly. They asked about the gap. She didn't lie. I lost my job, she said, and my home, but I didn't lose my skills. One manager shifted uncomfortably. They asked if she could still meet standards. Marisol met their eyes. I never stopped. When the interview ended, no one smiled. No one apologized. She stood, smoothed her sleeves, and walked out without asking for reassurance. Outside, Ivy and Elsie ran to her. How was it? Ivy asked. Marisol knelt level with them. Fair, she said. Elsie tilted her head. Is that good? Marisol thought of the marble floors, the whispers, the silence. It's honest, she replied, and that's enough. Marisol's first shift back started before sunrise. She arrived early the way she always had, hair pulled back neatly, uniform pressed. The cart felt familiar beneath her hands, steady, grounded, real. Some co-workers avoided her eyes. Others watched openly. She understood both reactions. Being singled out made people nervous. Being associated with the CEO's decision made them cautious. Marisol didn't explain herself. She worked. Room after room, she moved with quiet precision. Corners wiped clean. Sheets folded sharp and exact. Mirrors polished until light bounced cleanly back. By mid-morning, a problem erupted on the executive floor. A VIP guest had spilled a full bottle of red wine across a cream-colored carpet hours before a major conference. Voices rose. Panic spread. A supervisor froze. Someone muttered, "We're done." Marisol stepped forward. "I can fix it," she said calmly. The supervisor hesitated. "That stain is fresh," Marisol replied, "which means it can be lifted." She didn't ask permission again. She directed two staff members, mixed a solution from memory, worked the stain, carefully blotting, not scrubbing. Time slowed around her. The room fell quiet except for the soft press of cloth against carpet. Minutes passed. Then the red faded. Then it disappeared. The carpet looked untouched. The supervisor exhaled sharply. "How did you?" Marisol straightened. "I've done this floor before." Later that afternoon, a handwritten note arrived at the front desk. "The woman who cleaned my room saved my event. Please recognize her work." The note made its way upstairs. When Holden read it, something in his chest loosened. Not relief. Validation. This wasn't charity. This was correction. The next board meeting was colder than the last. Reports slid across the table untouched. Numbers felt small. Graham Ashford broke the silence first. "You're undermining focus," he said sharply. "One employee does not justify rewriting policy." Holden didn't sit back. He leaned forward. "One employee shows us where policy failed," he replied. Graham's jaw tightened. "You're turning this company into a moral experiment," Holden nodded once. "Because ignoring morality is how we ended up here." A murmur moved around the table. Another executive spoke carefully. "Staff are noticing. Morale is changing," Good Holden said. "It should." The meeting ended without resolution. That evening, Holden walked the hotel floors alone. No entourage, no announcement. He saw Marisol at work, directing quietly, correcting gently, holding standards high without raising her voice. Staff listened. Not because of his name, because of her competence. Down the hall, Ivy and Elsie sat in a small staff lounge with coloring books supervised safe. They looked up when Holden appeared. Elsie smiled first. "Mom's really good," she said, proud. Holden crouched. I see that. Ivy studied him. Is she going to be okay? The question was small. The responsibility was not. Holden met her gaze. She already is. Later that night, Holden stood by the window of his office, city lights blinking awake. He knew this path wouldn't be easy. He might lose allies, favor, even control of the company his name was carved into. But for the first time, walking away felt impossible, because standing still doing nothing had already cost too much. It started with a leak. One photo, grainy, taken through a lobby window. Holden Ashford walking beside Marisol Quinn. The headline didn't care about context. It didn't care about dignity. Billionaire CEO saves laid-off housekeeper. By noon, it was everywhere. Commentary exploded like fireworks, bright, loud, and careless. Some praised Holden for having a heart. Others accused him of performative guilt. Investors called, advisors warned. Executives forwarded emails with subject lines like risk and control the narrative. Marisol felt it before she saw it. Whispers in the staff corridor sharpened. A few co-workers who had warmed to her pulled back, suddenly cautious, like kindness could cost them something. A supervisor offered a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. You're trending, someone muttered, half joke, half warning. Marisol didn't open her phone until her lunch break. When she did, her stomach dropped. Her name was spelled wrong. Her past was flattened into a single dramatic sentence. Her daughters' faces were blurred, thank God, but the story still used them like fuel. Twins. Hungry. Van. Words tossed out like bait. She closed the screen with shaking hands. In the staff lounge, Ivy and Elsie were coloring at a table under the watch of a vetted community volunteer Holden had arranged quiet, safe, out of sight. They looked up when Marisol entered, sensing the change in her breathing. Mom, Ivy asked carefully. Marisol forced her voice into steadiness. Just tired, baby. Elsie slid her drawing closer. A house with a sun over it. 2 stick girls holding hands. A woman in the middle, taller, stronger. Marisol smiled because her daughters deserved smiles. Then she kissed their heads and walked back into the hallway, like she hadn't just become a headline. Upstairs, Holden was being devoured by his own world. In the executive suite, his communications team hovered. Say this was a one-time act of goodwill, one said. Make it small. Emphasize brand values, another urged. Then move on. Holden stared at the screen showing the headline. The word saves sat in bold letters like an insult. He stood. She doesn't need saving, he said sharply. She needed fairness. Silence. A legal advisor cleared his throat. Sir, investors are concerned you're setting a precedent. They want assurance, Holden cut him off. Assurance that what? That we can still erase people with a spreadsheet. The room stiffened. His phone rang his father. Holden didn't answer. 2 minutes later, a message popped up, boardroom, now. Holden walked into the glass-walled boardroom with the city behind him like a cold witness. Graham Ashford sat at the head of the table, jaw clenched, eyes bright with restrained fury. You've turned our company into a circus, Graham snapped. Do you realize how this looks? Holden didn't sit. It looks like accountability. It looks like weakness, Graham shot back. Like guilt. Like you've lost control. Holden met his father's gaze. I lost control the day I signed off on cuts without learning names. A ripple moved through the executive's discomfort, fear calculation. Graham leaned forward. If you keep pushing this room to rise nonsense, we'll have to consider executive limitations. The board can vote. Holden felt the threat land like a blade. So this was the price. He thought of Ivy and Elsie's empty plates. 3, not 2. He thought of Marisol returning to marble floors with her head high. He thought of the way the media had tried to turn her dignity into a spectacle. Holden's voice turned quiet, dangerous in its calm. Then vote, he said. And let the world see what we truly value. The board didn't vote that day. They did something worse. They stalled. They scheduled reviews. They requested impact assessments. They buried urgency under paperwork, the way corporations bury guilt smoothly, professionally, with clean hands. Holden left the boardroom with his father's eyes on his back like a curse. On the hotel floor below, Marisol felt the consequences immediately. A supervisor approached with forced politeness. "Ms. Quinn, we're adjusting assignments." Marisol's instincts tightened. "Adjusting how you'll be moved off the executive floor," the supervisor said. "Temporary. For stability." Stability. The word tasted like a lie. Marisol looked past the supervisor down the hallway where her cart sat. She could see staff watching from doorways pretending they weren't watching. "Is this because of the headlines?" she asked calmly. The supervisor's eyes flicked away. "It's just procedure." Procedure. That word again. The same word that had escorted her out 6 months earlier. Marisol nodded once. "Show me the written policy." The supervisor blinked. "Excuse me, show me where it says I'm reassigned because the internet got loud," Marisol replied. Her voice wasn't sharp. It was steady, stronger than fear. The supervisor's face hardened. "Don't make this difficult." Marisol leaned in slightly. "I'm not making it difficult. I'm making it fair." In the staff lounge, Ivy and Elsie remained safe, supervised, unaware of the corporate tide trying to pull their mother under again. That mattered. Marisol would not let this become their battle. She walked straight to the general manager's office. Holden wasn't there. Of course not. But the GM was. He tried to sound reasonable. "Marisol, we're under scrutiny." Any perception of favoritism, Marisol cut him off gently. "Favoritism is when someone gets something they didn't earn. I earned every room I ever cleaned." The GM exhaled tense. "You don't understand the pressure." Marisol's eyes didn't blink. "I understand pressure. I raised twins in a van." The GM flinched at the truth. At that exact moment, Holden walked in. He took one look at Marisol's face and knew something had happened. "What is this?" he asked, voice low. The GM hurried. "Sir, we're trying to protect the operation. We're just moving her assignment temporarily." Holden's gaze snapped. From the executive floor. "It's not punishment," the GM insisted. Marisol spoke before Holden could. "They want me quiet again," the GM protested. "That's not, it is," Marisol said calmly, "and I won't be erased twice." Holden turned to the GM, voice cold. "Put her back where she was scheduled." The GM hesitated. "Sir, the board." Holden stepped closer. "Not threatening. Final. The board doesn't run cleaning standards. We do. And if your staff can be punished for surviving, then this place doesn't deserve their excellence." The GM swallowed. Understood. He left quickly, like relief was something he didn't deserve to feel. Holden turned back to Marisol. "I'm sorry," he said, and it wasn't a polished apology. It was a broken one. Marisol's expression softened just enough to show the truth underneath her strength. "I don't need you to save me," she said. "I need you to stop the machine that did this." Holden nodded. Outside the office, the corridor felt quieter, like the building itself was listening. Down the hall, Ivy and Elsie peeked around the doorway when they saw Holden. Elsie waved timidly. Ivy watched his face like she could read the future there. Holden crouched in front of them. "Is Mom in trouble?" Ivy asked, voice small but steady. Holden's chest tightened. He chose his words with care. "Your mom is brave," he said, "and sometimes brave people make powerful people uncomfortable." Elsie frowned. "That's not fair." "No," Holden whispered. "It isn't." He stood and looked back toward the elevators, toward the boardroom above. He understood finally what this fight required. Not a program, a surrender, of ego, of safety, of approval. Holden walked toward the elevator with the kind of calm that only comes when a man decides he is willing to lose. The board vote came a week later. Holden received the calendar invite like a summons. No subject line. Just time, location, and the silent promise of consequences. On the morning of the meeting, he didn't wear his sharpest suit. He wore a simple navy coat, the kind he'd worn in Grant Park, because he needed to remember the version of himself who had stopped walking. In the lobby, Marisol worked as usual, quiet, precise, unshakable. Ivy and Elsie were not there. Holden made sure of that. They were at school, safe, normal, protected from the storm of adult ambition. Holden rode the elevator up alone. When the doors opened, the boardroom looked like a glacier glass, steel, expensive calm. Graham Ashford sat at the head, fingers interlaced, expression controlled. Executives lined the table like chess pieces. Holden took his seat. Graham began without greeting. "This situation has harmed investor confidence," he said. "Your initiative invites liability. It blurs boundaries. It paints us as unstable." Holden listened. He didn't interrupt. He let the words flow because he'd spent his life winning arguments. This time he needed to tell the truth. When Graham finished, he slid a document across the table. "We're proposing limitations on your authority, effective immediately pending vote." Holden looked at the paper, a quiet attempt to handcuff him. He set it down. "You want me silent?" Holden said calmly. Graham's eyes narrowed. "We want you responsible." Holden almost smiled. "Responsible is exactly what I'm trying to be." An executive cleared his throat. "Holden, the optics." Holden raised a hand. "Optics are what we use when we don't want to say values out loud." The room stiffened. Holden leaned forward. 6 months ago, a woman named Marisol Quinn was laid off under restructuring. Her record shows excellence. She deserved transition support. She deserved humane treatment. She received none. That happened under my leadership. Graham's voice sharpened. "So you'll punish the company for your guilt?" Holden's gaze held. "This isn't guilt. This is recognition." He continued, voice steady. "I met her twin daughters in Grant Park. They set out 3 empty plates and pretended to eat to forget hunger. One plate was for their mother. A murmur rippled, some shifting uncomfortably. Others looked away. Holden didn't soften it for them. He didn't dramatize. He simply stated the truth because truth didn't need performance. "I built buildings," he said quietly. "But I failed people." Graham's jaw flexed. "You're emotional." Holden nodded once. "Yes. Because I'm human. And I want this company to be human too." He slid a folder across the table, data retention projections, training metrics, guest satisfaction patterns. Room to Rise is not a charity project. It's a structural correction. Fair transitions reduce turnover. Stability increases performance. Dignity improves brand trust. An executive blinked. Another leaned in, reading. Graham scoffed. "You're trying to buy morality with spreadsheets." Holden's voice dropped. "No. I'm translating morality into the only language you've respected." Silence. Then Holden did something the room didn't expect. He pushed back his chair. "If you vote to limit me because I won't ignore the people who keep our hotels alive," he said, "then you should know this. I will step down before I sign another silent cruelty." A shockwave moved through the table. Graham's eyes widened, rage and fear. "You wouldn't." Holden's answer was quiet, absolute. "I already did, because the truth was he'd stepped down from the man he used to be the moment he unfolded that note." He walked out of the boardroom without waiting for applause or permission. Downstairs, the hotel lobby glowed warm against the cold outside. Staff moved through their shifts, real work, real lives. That evening, Holden visited Marisol's small apartment placement arranged through verified housing support, temporary, safe, stable. No cameras, no announcements. On the table, Ivy and Elsie had set out paper plates again, only this time there was real food. And there were 4 plates. Holden stopped. "Why 4?" he asked softly. Elsie looked up, eyes calm. "One is for someone else who's hungry," she said. like it was obvious. Like kindness was just the natural order of the world. Ivy added, "There's always room." Holden felt his throat tighten. In that moment he understood the true climax wasn't the vote. It was the fourth plate. Because it meant the cycle was breaking. Not through his power, through their hearts. Change did not arrive with a press release. It came quietly, the way real things do. The board vote ended in delay, then compromise. Authority was not stripped from Holden, but it was no longer absolute. The Room to Rise framework was approved as a pilot buried under neutral language and cautious optimism. It was enough. In the weeks that followed, something subtle shifted inside the hotels. Turnover slowed. Complaints dropped. Smiles lasted longer. People noticed when they were seen. Marisol Quinn worked steadily, her reputation rebuilding itself not through headlines, but through consistency. She trained new staff. She corrected mistakes without humiliation. She carried herself like someone who had already survived the worst and refused to let it define her. Ivy and Elsie adjusted to normal days again, school mornings, homework at the kitchen table, laughter that came easily now. They still shared everything, but hunger was no longer one of those things. Holden visited often quietly. No cameras, no entourage. One afternoon he stood in the lobby watching staff move through their routines, cleaning, greeting, working with the quiet pride of people who knew they mattered. For the first time, the building didn't feel like a monument to success. It felt alive. That night, an envelope arrived at Holden's office. No return address. Inside was an old black and white photograph, a small roadside inn in Boston, weathered and modest. On the back, in his father's handwriting, were 6 simple words. "Someone once gave me a chance." Holden closed his eyes. Sometimes reconciliation didn't need permission, just truth. Early summer softened the city. Under a canopy of green in Lincoln Park, a blanket lay spread across the grass. Nothing fancy, just sandwiches wrapped in paper fruit and a bowl lemonade sweating in plastic cups. Marisol sat cross-legged watching her daughters talk at the same time, interrupting each other with twin enthusiasm. Holden listened, smiling more than he spoke. Elsie leaned back suddenly. "Do you remember the pretending picnic?" she asked, serious. Holden nodded. "I do." Ivy wrinkled her nose. "That one wasn't fun." No, Holden agreed quietly. It wasn't. Elsie looked at the food spread before them. "This one's better." Marisol brushed her hair back gently. "Because this one's real." Holden felt the words settle somewhere deep. Ivy reached into her backpack and pulled out a small sketchbook. She flipped to a page and held it up proudly. The drawing showed a table. 4 plates. People around it smiling. "Why 4 again?" Holden asked, though he already knew. Ivy answered without hesitation. "One is for someone else who might be hungry." Elsie added softer, just in case. Marisol blinked hard, then laughed, the sound catching before it escaped. Holden looked at the drawing and understood something essential. The end of hunger wasn't abundance. It was room. Room to notice. Room to care. Room for one more. The next morning, Holden stood before the glass doors of the Ashford Grand as the sun lifted over the skyline. Inside, staff moved through another ordinary day, greeting guests, changing linens, setting tables. Ordinary work done by people who were no longer invisible. Holden slipped a small folded note into his pocket. It wasn't the original one. It was new. Written in careful, uneven letters, "You made the plates full." Grace had once imagined empty plates away. Ivy and Elsie had imagined something better into being. Holden took a breath and stepped inside. Not as a billionaire, not as a savior, as a man who had finally learned where he belonged. Later that evening, as city lights blinked on, Marisol tucked her daughters into bed. Ivy fell asleep mid-sentence. Elsie clutched her sister's sleeve even in dreams. Marisol stood in the doorway a moment longer, listening to the steady rhythm of safety. Somewhere across the city, Holden looked out over Chicago and understood something he hadn't known before. Success was not what you built above others. It was what you refused to leave behind. And in a world still full of hunger of all kinds, the promise was simple, and it was enough, no more empty plates. Did this story move you? Share your thoughts in the comments and rate this story from 1 to 10. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe to the channel, and click the bell icon so you don't miss other heartwarming stories. Click on the last screen to see the next emotional chapter waiting for you. See you in the next story.